Shaquille O'Neal pulled up to a small bakery in the Treme neighborhood of New Orleans. It was 6:47 in the morning on December 23rd. He had a list. 23 local bakeries he had picked himself for his Christmas charity run. But when he saw the sign above the door, he didn't get out. Sweet Ruthie's. There was only one person in the world he had ever called by that name. He sat in the car for 4 more minutes, both hands still on the wheel. Inside, that woman was baking, like she had done every single morning for 19 years. Alone, without anyone. When she turned around and saw him, she didn't say a word about the past. She just asked how many boxes he needed. There was something she kept locked in a drawer under the counter. There was a child who had grown up carrying a question that was never answered. What had happened to Darlene in those 19 years? And why did she name her bakery after something only one person on Earth would recognize? The sky over New Orleans that morning was not quite dark and not quite light. It was that gray-purple color you only see in the deep south in winter. Not cold like up north, just heavy and wet. The air rolling in off the Mississippi smelled like mud and river water. Streetlights were still on. An old man walked his black dog past 2714 La Harpe Street without looking up. Green trash cans lined the curb. A faded jazz festival poster from March hung loose on a wall, turning in the soft wind. A black Escalade sat against the curb. Nothing flashy, nothing that stood out at this hour. Inside the car, Shaq sat still. He wore a dark gray hoodie, dark jeans, and a baseball cap pulled low. No assistant, no security, just him and a handwritten list on the passenger seat. 23 bakeries, 23 addresses. Next to each one, the number of boxes he planned to pick up. This year he wanted to do it himself. No phone orders. No one sent in his place. He wanted to drive to each shop, walk through the door, and put his own hands on the boxes before they reached kids who had nothing under the tree. Number 7 on the list. Sweet Ruthie's. Community Bakery, Treme. He had first seen that name the night before when his assistant sent over the file. He was sitting in his hotel room downtown, a glass of water on the table, the reading lamp on. He scrolled past the first 22 names without thinking twice. Then he hit number 7. He stared at those 2 words on the screen for a long time. Sweet Ruthie. Nobody else in the world knew that name. It wasn't a popular shop name. It wasn't a famous character. It wasn't a place. It was the name he had given one specific person on one specific morning 32 years ago. 1993, a small kitchen in a rented apartment in the Colonial Town neighborhood of Orlando. An old radio on top of the fridge playing Sweet Ruthie, May by Bobby Blue Bland. That slow, heavy blues. That raspy Mississippi voice. Darlene stood at the counter working the dough. Her shoulders rocked slightly with the music. Her lips moved along to the words, without her even knowing it. Her dark hair was braided back tight. Her hands were white with flour. Outside the window, the Florida sun was just coming up, throwing gold light through the bamboo blinds onto the wood floor. He was leaning against the kitchen doorframe watching her when he said it for the first time. Sweet Ruthie. She turned around, flour on her cheek, and looked at him like he'd just said the dumbest thing she'd ever heard. Don't call me that. He called her that every day after. Now that name was painted on a hand-lettered cream-colored sign above a small bakery in the Treme. And he was sitting in a black Escalade staring at it, feeling something heavy and dull pressing under his ribs. Not quite pain, not quite sadness, just weight. The kind you feel when you know you're about to face something you've been avoiding for a very long time. He could back out, move on to number 8. Nobody would ever know he had stopped here. He turned off the engine. Got out. At 7 feet 1 and 325 pounds, he had to duck to get through the bakery door. He turned his shoulders sideways to fit. The little bell above the door rang. Inside, an old wood counter with a dark varnish scratched along the left edge from years of use. A glass display case with fresh pastries still fogging the inside of the glass, the light inside making the crusts glow gold. The smell of butter and cinnamon was so thick he felt like he could reach out and hold it. Photos hung on the walls. A Treme Street festival from 2018, a church gathering with no year written below it, kids in school uniforms lined up in front of a gate. These were photos of people who belonged here. not decoration bought from a store. In the right corner, an old ceiling fan turned slowly even, though the room wasn't hot. It clicked on every rotation, steady and even, like a clock. A woman stood, with her back to him, stacking pastries onto a tray with her bare hands. Shaq recognized the way she stood before she turned around. Dark hair with a few strands of gray, braided tight behind her neck. The same as before. The way she held herself, shoulders back, spine straight. The posture of someone used to standing for long hours, without anything to lean on. She turned around, and they looked at each other. For seconds, maybe 5. Nobody counted. No screaming. No tears, not right then. No running toward each other. No stepping back. Just the silence of two people who had walked into the same room after 19 years, and both understood there was no way to pretend this was normal. Darlene Okafor, 44 years old. Those same eyes he remembered, every detail the same, but with something sitting behind them now that hadn't been there before. Not hatred. Heavier than hatred. She said, "How many boxes?" Her voice was perfectly calm. The voice of someone standing behind a counter. Not the voice of someone facing 19 unspoken years. Shaq didn't answer right away. He stood there, too big and awkward for the small shop, his head nearly brushing the ceiling light, his shoulders almost as wide as the kitchen doorway. He shifted to the side of the counter on purpose, making himself smaller, stepping out of the center of the room. "I need to see the menu first," he said. She slid the laminated menu across the counter, without a word. Then went back to work. The bell above the door rang again at 7:13 in the morning. Pastor Calvin Webb walked in. 71 years old. Old black suit jacket worn thin at the lapels. Bible tucked under his left arm. Brown leather shoes polished since early morning. He walked slowly, but with purpose, the way a man walks when he's never in a rush, because he always ends up exactly where he needs to be. His hair was completely white, cut short and neat. His face was lined deep, the kind of lines that come from decades of sitting with people through their darkest nights. He stepped through the door, the bell rang, and he saw Shaq immediately. He didn't stop, didn't open his mouth, didn't react the way people usually react when they recognize someone famous. He just pulled out the chair at the corner table on the left, the same table he sat at every morning, the wood top ringed, with old coffee stains, set his Bible down, and sat. Darlene poured his coffee without being asked, set the cup on a small saucer, put a little bread roll beside it. They didn't exchange a single word. This was the habit of many years, the kind that doesn't need language to run. Shaq watched that from where he stood. He understood immediately. This man knew, not part of the story, all of it. He picked up his own coffee, walked to the corner table, and pulled out the chair across from the old man. The chair scraped against the floor when he sat. He was so large that his knees nearly touched the underside of the table. "You know who I am," Shaq said. Not a question. Pastor Calvin looked down at the cup in his hands. No rush. He took one slow sip. Set it down. "I've known who you are since 1999, he said. His voice was low and even. "I used to wonder if you still remembered how to find this place." Shaq set his own cup down. "How much do you know?" "Enough." Now Pastor Calvin looked up. His eyes were dark brown, and they didn't judge, but they weren't soft in the easy way either. These were the eyes of a man who had sat beside too many people in their worst hours and had never once pretended everything was fine. "I baptized the child. I sat with Darlene on the nights she couldn't sleep. I listened when she needed to talk, and I stayed quiet when she needed quiet." He paused for one beat. "And I prayed that if you ever came back, you'd come back the right way." "What does that mean?" Shaq asked. "The right way?" Pastor Calvin picked up his cup again, took another sip, set it down. He looked out the window toward La Harpe Street, where the morning was slowly filling in. A man on a bike hauling a cargo load. An older woman carrying an umbrella even, though it wasn't raining. Two kids running toward school. Then he said, his voice unchanged, "She doesn't need you to come here and save her. She saved herself a long time ago. What she needs is for you to sit down and listen." That sentence hung in the air of the little bakery, between the smell of butter and cinnamon and the steady clicking of the ceiling fan. Shaq sat with it for a moment. He looked over at the counter, where Darlene was still working, back turned. shoulders steady, hands moving trays, with the rhythm of someone who had done this exact motion too many times to count. She wasn't looking at the corner table, but he knew she was hearing every word. Listen, not come in and write a check. Not come in and say sorry so he could feel better. Listen. He stood up, left a bill on the table to cover the coffee. Walked back to the counter. This time he didn't pick up the menu. He didn't ask about the name of the shop. He just stood in front of her and waited until she looked up at him. Then he said it straight. I'm sorry I didn't come back sooner. Darlene stopped moving. She looked at him, not searching for something, just checking that he was real. The look of someone who had waited so long for a thing to happen that they stopped believing it would, and then when it finally did, they didn't know how to respond right away. Then she turned and walked to the back. Her steps were steady, not rushed. The sound of a drawer pulling open. The rustle of paper. Silence for about 90 seconds. Just the low hum of the oven and the even clicking of the fan. She came back out. In her hands was a small box wrapped in brown paper, a red ribbon tied around it. The red had faded. It wasn't the bright Christmas red anymore. It was the red of something that had been kept in a dark drawer for a long, long time. She set it on the counter in front of him. She didn't push it toward him. She just placed it there. I make one of these every year, she said. Her voice was steady, but this was no longer the voice of someone behind a counter. This was the voice of someone saying out loud, for the first time, something they had kept inside for too long. On your birthday. Every year. 19 years. I never knew who to send it to. Shaq looked at the box. He didn't open it right away. She added, her voice dropping just slightly. Not from emotion. From honesty. Not because I was waiting for you. Because I needed a way to remember that I once truly loved someone. And that isn't something to be ashamed of. Outside, a garbage truck rolled down La Harpe Street. The grinding sound rose and faded. Through the window, the light was a little brighter now, as the sun began to lift above the roofline. Shaq stood there holding his coffee cup, not drinking, looking at the box on the counter. He didn't speak, not because he had nothing to say, but because there wasn't a sentence in the world that was enough. This was the point of no return. They both knew it. The back kitchen door opened at 7:41 in the morning. Familiar footsteps. Not the footsteps of a customer. The footsteps of someone who knows they're walking into their own place. A bag hitting the kitchen floor. A chair being moved. Brianna Okafor pushed the kitchen door open, with her shoulder, because both hands were full, a tote bag, and a takeout container she was bringing back. Her Navy nursing scrubs were still on, from her overnight shift at Tulane Medical Center. She stopped here almost every morning on her way home to sleep. Come in for 15 minutes. Drink some water. Eat the small pastry her mom left on the side counter for her. Then head home. Hair in a fast bun on top of her head. Faint dark circles under her eyes, from a 12-hour overnight shift, but her eyes were still sharp. She set her bag on the kitchen floor and turned toward the fridge. Then she looked, through the small pass-through window, from the kitchen to the front counter. The man standing in front of her mother was taller than anyone she had ever seen walk through the door of this shop. Baseball cap pulled low, gray hoodie, hands as wide as serving trays resting flat on the wood counter. Not the posture of a regular customer. Not the posture of a delivery person. She stood still in the kitchen and looked through that window for a few seconds. Then her mother turned and came into the kitchen. She saw Brianna. She didn't flinch. Brianna, this is Shaquille, an old friend. Her voice was calm, the same voice she used when introducing anyone. Brianna stepped out to the counter, gave a polite nod. Hey. Shaq nodded back. He looked at her, and he noticed something. Not in her face, not in her eyes. In the way she stood when she nodded. Head tilted slightly to the left. Right shoulder lifted a little. Weight shifted to the left foot. He recognized that stance because it was his own. The Orlando Magic staff used to point it out during practice. Shaq, you're standing crooked again. She had no idea she was standing like her father. He turned to Darlene. Kept his voice low, just enough for two people to hear. What year was she born? Darlene didn't answer right away. She stood still. Her hand was gripping the tray just slightly tighter than before. Enough for him to see. Brianna didn't notice. Darlene's face didn't change. But her eyes told him she had been waiting for that question for a very long time. Not waiting to answer it, waiting to see if he was the kind of man who would finally ask. Then she said, 1999, one word. Shaq didn't need long to work it out. He left Orlando in June of 1999 when he signed with the Los Angeles Lakers. 9 months before, that was the fall of 1998, the end of the season when everything between him and Darlene had been at its best. That peak he hadn't known what to do with, so he had quietly pulled away. The butter and cinnamon air in the small bakery went very still. The ceiling fan clicked. Brianna looked from Shaq to her mother. She didn't know what had just passed between them in those few quiet words. But she knew her mother's face after 25 years of watching it. And right now, that face was saying something it had never said out loud. I'm heading home to sleep, Brianna said. Her voice was easy, normal. I'll be back this afternoon. She picked up her bag, walked out the back door. The door closed behind her. It was just Shaq, Darlene, and Pastor Calvin at the corner table, his eyes on his Bible, though the page hadn't turned. Darlene started talking, not because he asked. She talked because Pastor Calvin was right. She needed to be heard, not comforted, not explained to, not apologized at. She just needed someone to sit across from her long enough to hear it all. And this was the first time in 19 years that someone had done that. Sat down in front of her, without money in their hands, without a prepared apology, and asked her in a real voice, "How have you been living?" 1999, she was 18. She found out after he was already gone. Not gone in some big dramatic ending, with a slammed door and raised voices. He had just slowly faded, the way water pulls back from a beach before a big wave. The calls got shorter, then fewer, then nothing. She didn't call him when she found out she was pregnant. It wasn't that she didn't have his number. It was that she sat next to that phone in her rented room for 12 hours straight, and she finally understood one thing clearly. She knew he would come if she called. He always showed up when someone needed him. That wasn't the problem. The problem was he would come because he felt he had to, and she did not want her child growing up with a father who was there out of obligation, not love. She had watched enough children in the Treme grow up with that kind of love. She wasn't going to let that happen to her kid. My mother let me stay with her until Brianna was about 1, she said. Her hands kept wiping the counter out of habit, even though it was already clean. After that, I rented a room on Ursuline's. $340 a month. The walls sweated in the rain. The window looked out at a brick wall. I waited tables on the morning shift at a diner on Magazine Street. In the evenings, I took a baking program at the community training center. 2 years. Brianna slept in a stroller in the corner of the classroom while I learned how to make croissants. Shaq sat and listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't nod in the polite way people nod when they're waiting for their turn to talk. He just sat and listened. His hands, as wide as the little box sitting on the counter, were pressed flat against the wood. No one could see it, but the veins in them were raised. He was using everything he had to stay seated. The dough machine broke on December 22, 2002, Darlene continued. Her voice didn't waver. The way you describe something that happened to someone else. Brianna was 6 months old. It cost $847 to fix. I had $203 in my account. She stopped for a beat. I mixed the dough by hand until 2 in the morning. Got through 47 batches. My fingers locked up. I couldn't fully bend them for 3 days after. Christmas 2002, Shaq was in Los Angeles on his 3rd year with the Lakers. His contract was $21 million a season. He had not known that in New Orleans, someone was mixing dough by hand until 2 in the morning because she couldn't cover $847. When Brianna was 7, Darlene said, "We were eating dinner. Rice and black beans. The 5th time that week." She looked out the small side window toward the alley. She looked up at me and asked, "Mama, who is my dad?" A short silence. I told her, "Your father is the best man I ever knew." But he wasn't ready. That sentence sat in the air of the bakery longer than anything else she had said that morning. Nobody filled the space it left. Nobody needed to. Shaq looked down at his own hands. He thought about all the times in his life he had written a check to fix something. He had done it over and over, using money as a language when he didn't know what other language to use. Buying back mortgages for families facing foreclosure. paying funeral costs for a man the world had forgotten, covering car repairs for strangers on the side of the road. He had always believed that money, used right, could stand in for things he didn't know how to give directly. This time there was no language like that. Money couldn't buy back the morning Brianna first pulled herself to standing. Money couldn't erase the question a 7-year-old asked over a bowl of rice and beans. Money couldn't replace the $847 Darlene didn't have on December 22, 2002, while he was signing a $21 million contract in Los Angeles. This was the thing money couldn't reach. And Shaq, a man who had used money to solve nearly everything, was sitting in front of it with nothing in his hands. "Why didn't you call me?" he asked, not accusing her, not blaming her, just asking honestly because he needed to understand. "You could have found my number if you really wanted to." Darlene set down the cloth she had been holding. She turned and looked directly into his eyes. "Because I knew you'd come. And I did not want my daughter growing up knowing her father was there, because he felt guilty, not because he loved her." Silence. This was the moment Shaq understood what he had spent 19 years looking away from. His absence was not an accident. It wasn't life pulling him away. It wasn't being too busy. It was a choice. The choice of a man who had no model for stability. A man who grew up watching his biological father leave, as if leaving was just something fathers did. A man who, whenever something in his life became too good, too real, too steady, found a way to break it because he didn't know what else to do with something good. And Darlene had always known that. She never said it. She never used it to punish him. She never used the child to force his hand. She just kept going, raised her daughter, learned a trade, opened a shop, named the shop after a word only one person on earth would recognize. And every year on his birthday, she baked a small cake, put it in a box, and locked it in a drawer under the counter because she never knew where to send it. He looked at her standing behind the counter, shoulders back, eyes not waiting for him to say anything more. And he thought of Lucille, his mother, the woman who had raised him alone, through Newark, through small apartments, through years when the money wasn't enough, but she never let him see her break. The woman he had made a promise to, that he would go back and finish his degree no matter what it took. He looked at Darlene and saw the same thing. Not weakness, the kind of strength that people with money rarely understand because they have never needed it. Shaq opened the birthday box. The cake inside was small, no wider than 4 inches across. No decoration, no candles, no writing on top, just a simple butter cake, the crust of flat, even gold. When he lifted the lid, he caught a faint smell of vanilla. But under the cake, under the parchment paper lining the bottom of the box, was a small stack of folded notes held together with a rubber band. He lifted them out, slipped the band off, counted them. 19. Each one was about half the size of an index card. Written by hand in blue ink. The handwriting changed, from note to note, year to year, from the loose, slightly unsteady script of someone young to the clean, settled hand of someone who had grown into their life. He opened the first one. 2006. The letters were rushed. A few smudges. "Happy birthday." Brianna said her first word today. She said warm. I don't know why, that was the first one. But I think she gets things right about a lot of things. He set it down. Opened the next. 2009. Steadier handwriting. "She asked about you. I told her you were really good at basketball. She asked if you were Shaq. I didn't answer. She said, 'You look sad whenever you watch basketball, Mama.' I don't know when she started noticing that." 2013. She made the varsity basketball team. First year of high school. Starting lineup. I wish you could have seen her face when she read the list. I really wish you had been there. 2018. This year was hard. I got sick for a few weeks and had to close the shop for 11 days. Brianna picked up extra shifts at the hospital to help cover it. She never said a word about it. She just did it. I watch her sometimes, and I see you in there. Not the way she looks, but the way she goes quiet and just stays. He stayed on, that one for a while. 2024, the most recent note. The ink still looked fresher than the rest. She graduated from nursing school in May. I don't have words for how proud I am. I think Lucille would understand this feeling. Shaq read to the end of that last line. Set the note down on the wood counter. Sat still. Lucille, his mother, The woman who had raised him alone, through Newark, through cramped apartments, through years when money was never enough. But she never once let him see her go down. The woman he had made a promise to. He would go back. He would finish school, no matter what it took. Darlene knew that. She knew enough about him to write that sentence on the last note on the very night before he walked through her door. The ceiling fan clicked. Outside, the tramway was filling in. Car sounds. People calling to each other. The smell of coffee drifting over from the place next door. A regular morning in a regular neighborhood in this city, where history and the present share the same sidewalk, and nobody thinks that's unusual. 19 notes. 19 years. And Brianna still didn't know he was sitting here reading them. The morning of December 24th. 7:22 in the morning. Brianna pushed through the front door of the bakery. Not the back door like yesterday. The front, with the bell. She wasn't in her scrubs. Loose dark green sweater. Jeans. Hair down. She had slept. The circles under her eyes were gone. She saw Shaq right away, sitting at Pastor Calvin's corner table, coffee in front of him, the folded list of 23 bakeries in his hand. Like he had been sitting there for a while. Like he was used to sitting there. She looked over at her mother. Darlene was behind the counter, back turned, packing boxes. She gave one small nod. No words. No explanation. That nod said everything. This is the moment. Brianna hung her bag on the hook inside the kitchen door. Came back out. Pulled the chair across from Shaq and sat down. They looked at each other across the small wood table. Are you my father? Shaq looked straight into her eyes. Her eyes were shaped like her mother's. But there was something inside them that was his. Something he recognized from the mornings he looked in the mirror and didn't want to. I'm not 100% sure, he said. But I think so. Does my mother know? She knows. Brianna nodded slowly. She didn't cry. She didn't stand up. She didn't get angry the way he had prepared himself for. She just sat there, with the face of someone who has finally heard the answer to a question they carried for too long. An answer that doesn't make things easier, just makes them real. Outside the window, a delivery truck pulled up across the street. The driver got out, rolled a hand truck around to the back, and started unloading. The normal work of a normal morning on December 24th. After a moment, Brianna asked, "What are you going to do now?" Shaq looked out at the street. La Harpe was filling up. Footsteps. A bicycle. Somewhere down the block, a man was whistling. The damp winter morning air of New Orleans. Not cold the way the North gets cold, just thick and warm in the way this place always is. A smell he didn't find anywhere else. I don't know, he said honestly. No big promises. No picture of a future that didn't exist yet. But I'm not disappearing again. Brianna looked at him for another moment. She didn't answer right away. Then she stood up, not to leave, but to go, into the kitchen. She took the green apron, with her name stitched on it off its hook on the door, tied it behind her back, stepped in beside her mother. Two women in a small kitchen, shoulder to shoulder, moving in sync the way people do when they have worked beside each other for so many years that their bodies know the rhythm without thinking. Shaq watched them for a moment. Then he stood. He ducked through the counter doorway. I'll take 200 boxes, he said to Darlene. For the charity run. At market price. Not a friend discount. Not a donation price. Because this product deserves to be paid for at what it's worth. Darlene turned around. Looked at him. Nodded. No thank you. No visible emotion. Just a nod. The way a skilled worker accepts fair recognition. Not too much. Not too little. That nod wasn't submission. It was the quiet acceptance of someone receiving exactly what they had always deserved. He paid. Left the delivery address written on a small piece of paper torn from the notebook he carried. Before he walked out, he looked into the kitchen. Brianna was cutting dough with a metal scraper, her hands steady and even. If there's ever a day you want to ask the questions you've been holding onto, he said, I'll be there. No cameras. No other people. Just me. Brianna didn't answer. But the hand cutting the dough stopped for half a second. Then went back to work. The bell above the door rang softly. Shaq ducked out and turned his shoulders to fit through the frame. Outside, the morning light had come up fully now. The pale winter sun of a New Orleans December, not warm enough to feel, but bright enough to see everything clearly. He opened the Escalade, got in, looked at the Sweet Ruthie's sign one more time through the windshield. Then he drove away. December 24th, 5:31 in the morning. Darlene Okafor unlocked the front door of her shop while it was still dark. Her fingers found the light switch without looking. The yellow light came on. Wood counter, empty display case waiting for the first batch, community photos on the wall, the ceiling fan starting its slow, clicking spin. She set her bag down, put on her apron, turned on the oven. Then she saw the envelope. It was sitting neat and flat on the right corner of the counter, where she always left yesterday's receipts. Thick white envelope. No return address. No stamp. Someone had left it by hand. She didn't open it right away. She washed her hands, started the first pot of coffee, took out the bowl of dough she had left to rise overnight. While the coffee was running, she picked up the envelope, opened it. Inside was a thick stack of papers, a supply contract. Sweet Ruthie's was named as the exclusive provider of baked goods for 23 schools in a local program supporting kids from low-income families. 12 months. Total contract value, $94,600. Signed by Harrison Community Partners, LLC. No individual name. No cover letter. No explanation. Just one line, written by hand in the bottom corner of the last page. Big, even letters in black ballpoint pen. Sweet Ruthie deserved this 19 years ago. Darlene read it. Read it again. She stood still in the yellow light of her bakery at 5:37 in the morning. One day before Christmas, the treme completely quiet around her, and for the first time in a very long time, she didn't know what to do next. She stood there long enough for the coffee to finish and start going cold. Then she folded the contract, placed it in the drawer under the counter beside her accounting book and her lease. Closed the drawer, went back to the dough. The back door opened. Brianna came in, not from a shift. She hadn't worked the overnight. She had slept here on the small couch in the storage room, hair not yet combed, eyes still soft with sleep. Wearing that wide dark green sweater that Darlene remembered buying for her when she was 16, back when she always ran cold in winter and refused to dress warm enough. She looked at her mother. Darlene was at the work table, dough already spread out, hands moving through it. Her shoulders moved, with each breath in a way that wasn't quite steady. The corners of her eyes were wet. Brianna stood still in the kitchen doorway looking at her. She didn't ask. After 25 years she knew when her mother needed words, and when her mother needed someone to just be there without any. She took her own apron off its hook. The green one. The one she had bought herself when she started nursing school. The one where she had stitched her own name in gold thread because she wasn't going to leave it blank like everyone else. She tied it behind her back, stepped in beside her mother. She started measuring flour. Darlene kept working the dough. The familiar rhythm of two people who had stood side by side at this table since Brianna was small enough to need a wooden box to stand on, 15 extra centimeters, so she could reach. Neither of them said a word. The smell of butter spread through the kitchen as the oven warmed. Through the small window that faced the side alley, the sky over New Orleans was shifting from black to gray-purple to the faint pink at the horizon, the slow, unhurried light of a southern winter morning. Not in a rush to prove anything to anyone. Down at the end of La Harpe Street, soft gospel music had started up from Pastor Calvin's church. The Christmas choir practice, early as always. Old voices and young voices together, as familiar as the smell of butter and the clicking of the fan. December 24th, one day before Christmas, Sweet Ruthie's started its morning the way it always did. Oven on, dough worked, bread rising, butter and cinnamon drifting out through the crack under the door and into the waking street. And two women stood side by side in a small kitchen, not needing to say anything, because after 25 years they knew each other well enough to understand that silence is not always absence. Sometimes it is the fullest thing one person can offer another. Shaquille O'Neal has said openly in many interviews that he used to destroy his best relationships. Not out of cruelty, but because he grew up without a model for peace and stability. When things got too good, too real, too settled, he didn't know what to do with that. So he left before it could leave him. This story is fiction. Darlene Okafor is not real. Sweet Ruthie's Bakery is not real. But the psychology in this story is real. The pattern of breaking good things out of fear of losing them. And the pattern of someone staying behind protecting their own dignity, without an audience, without thanks, without anyone watching. Maybe you're not here because you care about basketball. Maybe something in this story touched something you've been carrying on your own for a long time. The real question is not why people leave. The real question is, of all the people you know, who is baking every morning in silence? Not because anyone is watching. Not because anyone knows. Just because that's the thing they know how to do best. And have you told them, yet, that it's worth being seen?